Hello everyone, this is the Open Office Hours coding for April 26th. So we will be covering the C# and C++ classes today. So I'm here, and my name is Nelson, and Gavin's here.
Hello, and my name's Gavin.
Sweet.
That was slick.
Yeah, I think that went pretty well. So yeah, I guess it's question time.
It is. Well, tonight, for anyone who hasn't been in a cupboard for the last few weeks, Jason's away along with Zach and Angie in Canada visiting Leonard. So it's just us two for the evening. But we can cover C++ homework. That is the first one. Because that is now, the due time has passed. And C# homework's still due in tomorrow, but you can, if anyone is having specific problems on that, we can cover helping people out with any of that. If you have questions that you want Nelson to answer, please put them in the webinar questions panel. And wibbly wobbly woogle. That'll be fine.
Gavin, question for you.
Shall I do Zach? Hello. Did I screw up my C# homework at all, Gav? Maybe not. Username should be atomized. Should have the homework in there. I don't know what you're asking, Jonathan. Could you clarify that, please? And we have another question. How do we know what our grades are for the homework? It's basically pass-fail. If you pass the homework, you will...
Pass it?
You will just pass it. I was just thinking about notification, but really the only people I'm going to be getting in touch with for sure are people who don't manage to pass it. Just to try and... Because again, it comes down to the fact that it's not so much about the certificate or anything like that as actually making sure you learn the stuff. So it's more about seeing who's having problems and helping them to get a firmer grasp, and just about making people code, because you can't, no matter how much it feels like you're learning when you're sitting and watching, you need to do it. So yeah, if you pass, then you won't necessarily get any particular feedback. I should try and work out some way of mass splurging people to tell them, but a little way down the list at the moment in terms of things that need doing. And actually, I'll touch on the C# 101 the last couple of weeks, because I know this is why I'm reticent about saying I will notify people, because in the first few weeks I started sending out a mass email to people saying, congratulations, you have, and it just became a really, really awkward job to do with the number of people we've got taking the classes. So I will be putting together a list similar to the one Zach did for certificate eligibility by the beginning of next week. But again, it's just a question of fitting in around. We needed to get the classes set up, the testing for the C# done, and then the new system for homework all set up, which has been a lot of fun. Hopefully everyone who's expecting to have a folder now has received a Dropbox info. In fact, there was somebody who PM'd me earlier today who was having problems. I haven't seen them in here yet, but they'll know who they are if they are in here. I've responded to that PM, but so check your PM. Full stop. There's a full stop. I'm going to stop.
Have you already asked the week 2 homework?
For the week 2 homework, have I what? Oh, assessed it. No, the week 2 homework for which class, please? David, it's not actually. I did extend. Well, it was due by the beginning of this session, so no, I haven't. Well, no homework will be assessed until after the due date each time. Done. Really? Hang on 1 second. For C#. I've set it up, sir, and shared it. Have you run Dropbox recently? And did you check your emails? I know it sounds like a ridiculous question, but I thought I'd ask it anyway.
Ooh, we did have a programming question come in.
Ooh, I'll get you to sound all excited. Hang on, I'm just... that one has been answered. That one has been answered. Oh, you want to check that I got the right... that I didn't receive the UDK, John, and vice versa.
Okay, so somebody asks... for homework 3 in C++, how do you set up a string array? Well, the first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to include the string namespace. Or namespace, include file, header file. And then what you're going to want to do is create an array of strings. So doing this, we now have a 10-element string array.
Did you say what the question was?
Yes. How do you set up a string array?
Okay.
Note that the string class is inside of the standard namespace. So the using namespace std is required for importing string. So if you are importing types manually, or types and objects manually by writing this syntax, you're going to have to include in the string type. And then so now that you have a string array, so you can use it pretty much just how you'd expect to. Okay, did you get a demonstration? Wait, what?
Sorry, I was saying that probably ties into Alexander's question. How do I get the current index of a list C#?
Yeah. Current index of a list. Wait a second, I don't understand the question. Current index of a list.
No, actually I don't, now that I've listened to what I said. Do you mean when you're looping through it, Alexander?
Ooh, in a for each loop. Well, in a for each loop, you're pretty much, yeah. If you want to get...
Well, actually, that's a good chance to explain the sort of use case differences between for and for each. Because it is quite a subtle difference when you're first presented with it.
Now, what you could do, and this would be a very inefficient and not very good way, and a way that some people might approach the problem, and it's not guaranteed to always work, would be to say int, or what am I doing? Var index equals list dot index of item. Now, you could do that, but that's very naive, because not only is this very unperformant, but it will also, if, for example, there were 3 items in this list, it'll return the index 1 for every item. That's 3. So that's not what you want. What you could do, as well, is print out or keep an index variable that you increment on every iteration of the for each loop. Alternatively,
and preferably,
you could simply use a for loop. So then you can say var item equals list.I. So these are the two acceptable ways to get an index out of a as you're looping over an item. But the for example is going to be fewer lines of code.
Well, and really, if you need to be dealing with indices, then you'll want to use a for loop.
Yeah, well, for loop lends itself to a range of values.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to express when you would choose to use a for each or rather a for.
Yeah, I find myself doing this a few times, and I found myself doing this. Like I said, this is fewer lines of code when you need the index, but a lot of times you don't need the index.
Yeah.
And like Segfaw points out, when you just have an IEnumerable, you can't use a for loop, but we haven't quite covered those yet. Okay, so do you have a demonstration together from the homework for C#? No, but I will answer specific questions that people have about it.
Nelson, I wonder when to choose a field and when to choose a property, and when both.
Well, inside of a class, we have fields and properties, and methods, and nested types, and events, and all sorts of fun stuff. A field is generally going to be a private data member. I mean, a field, really all a field is a bit of data that objects that are instantiated from this class will possess in some sort of way. A property, on the other hand, is really just a neat, clean way to define one or two methods using a getter or a setter. Now, you typically will always want to wrap all access to any data within a class inside of a method that includes properties. So use properties to access data from within a class, and you want to do that at all times. You never want to expose a field publicly. Fields should always be private. However, you can get away with using automatic property syntax, which gives you a property, but it also generates a field behind the scenes for you. Even in cases where you're going to be using automatic properties, you should still use properties. There's a variety of reasons. One of them is binary compatibility. And what I mean by that is if you were to in some way decide that you wanted to provide a getter for one of your fields, if you change a public field into a public property, then you're going to run into some issues when it comes to upgrading other assemblies that might depend on your assembly. And it's just, as a rule of thumb, you shouldn't ever expose private data publicly. And this is something that's true for every language. Every object-oriented language has this concept of encapsulation, where the object itself is responsible for deciding not only how people can set the data on the object, but also how people can retrieve the data on the object.
It is worth mentioning the edge case, just because there may be some people in here who are working with Unity, which is if that you want, specifically in Unity, if you want things to show up in the inspector, you need to use public fields instead of properties.
Which is incredibly disgusting, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's why that's partly why I brought it up, just to hear the joy in your voice. But yeah, that is, it's not particularly, or indeed at all, property friendly, Unity.
So Christian, did that answer your question? Basically, as the rule of thumb, always use properties for publicly facing data, and then use fields for private data, or just data in general, which all should be private. Okay. I
want to address Ryan's question here, because it is, I've mentioned this a few times. His question was, can I put a comment in the code whether you pass or fail? I've mentioned this a couple of times in various videos. Once the due date is passed, which for the C++ has happened, I will be moving that week's folders. I'll be removing them from the Dropbox to elsewhere in order not to fill up my Dropbox ridiculously quickly, and possibly cause people problems submitting if my Dropbox is full. So do not rely on the code still being there after the due date. And if you want to keep it for reference, for an example of anything, or just because you like the program, put it somewhere else on your hard drive as well, because the Dropbox folder will be getting deleted sometime, hopefully in between this webinar ending and the next one starting.
Alrighty. Can we use getLine on a string array? No, but you can use getLine on an individual.
Oh, and NATO says same goes for UDK if you care. Yes, I thought it did. NATO's doing the same. He's going to be removing the UDK folders. He's got more of a problem with space than I have, because it's UDK and more data.
Oh, come on. What are you complaining about this time?
I think you're doing remarkably well. I'm waiting for you to try and start typing C# into a C++ file in a minute.
Okay.
Or vice versa.
But you can use getLine here with not with a full string array, but you can do it with a specific item within that array. So this is what that syntax would look like. Okay. Is there any chance of overloading a string array? I'm not sure about your question, Bob. I don't know what what you mean by it. Can you explain var a bit more? Yeah, basically, var is what's called, in C#, var is a way to do what's called implicit typing. And implicit typing simply means that the compiler will figure out the type of your variable for you, so you don't have to repeat it. So for example, instead of list person people2 equals new list of person, we can simply do var people equals new list of person. And we can do this because the C# compiler can look at our initializer and figure out the type of this expression, and therefore it's going to type the variable to whichever thing that we assigned it to in the initializer. And I want to point that out. That's very important to stress, because var is not doing dynamic typing. People is still a statically typed variable, typed to list of person.
var it's a shortcut making your life easier. It's to enable you to type fewer characters, essentially.
And it starts to get particularly interesting once you start talking about other functions and return values and stuff. It really forces you to choose better names for your variables, and not rely on the type of your variable to describe what your object does, which conceptually the type of the variable shouldn't have too much, not a considerable amount of weight into the understandability of your code. And so it forces people to choose better names for their variables. I typically will use implicit typing exclusively. Some people will only use implicit typing in cases such as this, and some people avoid implicit typing altogether, but I think they're silly.
I know it wasn't specifically asked, but do you want to just talk about auto? Are there any differences to auto?
None that I know of. Auto in C++ works the same way. So for example, if I were to say auto equals 10, this will get typed to an integer. It's when you have a list of pets and have to select one of them. Okay, the question was, or the
I thought that tied into the indexing question we had earlier.
it did. I'm going to go ahead and address it. I want my resharper. Ah!
Is it on tonight's lessons schedule?
No.
You could be naughty and sneak it in when I'm not looking. Because I want you using resharper as well.
So the example code that I was given looked something like this.
Oh, and apparently WedgeBob feels you. Yeah. Do you want people to...
I highly discourage this. There's a few reasons. First of all, this has to perform a linear search on the array, or on the list. This is not going to be a very performant method, especially once you start to get to a list with maybe 1 million elements in it. The second problem with this approach is that, for example, if I said, I could break it very easily. I can say, I can simply add the same person twice to it, or, I don't know. By adding the same person twice to this list, notice how his first index is 0, and the last one is 0. So I easily just broke this entire program. So not only is it unperformant, it also could cause a lot of issues in your code. What methods are we looking for the pet in C#? Anything. Use your imagination, have fun. It's not so much important what the pets themselves actually do, so much as understanding how methods interact with inheritance.
It's all about passing data around.
Right. Why is it not permitted to use abstract modifier with explicit interface implementation? So,
do you want to cover that once you've been into interfaces?
We didn't get into interface, but we will tonight.
Yeah, so do you want to...
But I can answer that really quickly.
Okay.
So the question is why I can't use an abstract modifier with explicit interface implementation, and the reason is actually very straightforward. Explicit interface implementation always results by definition in a private function. In fact, that's one of the reasons why you would use explicit interface implementation, so that you can implement an interface privately. However, it does not make any sense to have a private abstract method. This makes no sense, because if it's private, none of its inheritors can access it. Therefore, none of the inheritors can overwrite it, and therefore it's pointless. So because by definition explicit interface implementation is private, there's no way, or it's nonsensical to add the abstract modifier to it.
More on that later.
Do C++ projects always take up over 20 megabytes of space? There seems to be a lot of extra rubbish in the project folder. Yes, there is quite a bit. One of the things...
This would be a good thing... Sorry, lag. This would be a good thing to cover, actually, is what is safe to delete. Because they are quite large, those folders.
Yeah, as you see right here, I have an IPCH file that's 14 megs. I have an SDF...
What is an IPCH file?
I believe this has to do with the IntelliSense database. In fact, I'm pretty sure the IPCH file, it's not required. Visual Studio will rebuild it if it doesn't exist. But let me verify it. Looks like it's pre-compiled headers. which doesn't make any sense because we don't have... Okay, so it's something to do with precompiled headers. Even though we're not using precompiled headers, I don't know why it's there. As far as what's safe to delete, you can delete the debug folder, because this can always be rebuilt. The IPCH folder, the SUO folder, the SDF file, and the OpenSDF file. So basically, you can get away with deleting everything like here. Oh, come on, you stupid piece of trash. Go away, I misspelled.
Yeah, because hitting return 6 times is always more effective than once.
Whatever. Someone has a lock on my SDF files and my SUO files and my You miserable, miserable person. Let me...
It's not a person, Nelson. It's a machine. Fantastic, you've entered the Matrix.
Come on. Somebody's locking on this file, and I'm too lazy to download the Process Explorer to find out which one it is. But if you can delete these files, you can. You want to delete every file except for the SLIN and the project folder. And then inside the project folder, you can delete the debug folder. The debug folder is just going to contain some build artifacts. Okay, is var more expensive to use? Absolutely not. There's no performance difference whatsoever when using var over anything else. Remember, these two lines of code have the exact same performance characteristics. However, that's where you start to get into dynamic typing, which we're not going to be covering here in this series. But I want to point out, though, that dynamic does exist in C#, and it is fundamentally different from var. Dynamic does introduce a performance penalty, var does not, but var is the equivalent of explicit typing, just without the explicit part.
Why is presumably dynamics in C# just to cover, using C++ DLLs and similar?
Using com interop with other languages like Ruby or Python, and being able to do some certain fun stuff with it. Like, yeah.
Generally, you don't want to be doing it.
You can do some fun stuff with it, but it's not something you need to use on a typical programming basis. But it's really fun little thing.
Cool. Yeah, Bob's clarified what he meant. He didn't mean overloading. Adding to a string variable array 5 items. Oh, an array that's only 4 items long, adding a 5th item.
We did sort of cover that.
Do you want to just give the cliff notes?
Yeah, I first want to do something fun, though.
Blow up your VMs.
Here's some of the fun stuff you can do with dynamic typing. Or, sorry, I didn't mean to invoke. I meant to get. Oh, come on. See? Invoke accessing a property that doesn't exist, having this code execute instead. Definitely fun stuff. Okay, so the question was how to dynamically add...
He's got a string array of 4 strings. He wants 5.
Well, the short answer to that is you are out of luck. An array cannot be increased in size. And this is true for most languages that have the concept of an array, including C# and Java as well. An array is fixed size and is as many elements long as you specify as the constant member that you pass in inside the square brackets. This must be a constant integer. It can't be a runtime expression. Because main needs to know how much memory to allocate for itself to store the data it needs when the main function is invoked by the operating system or by the runtime libraries. There's no way to dynamically add or remove elements from an array. Now, there are types inside of this standard C++ library that allow you to mimic the behavior of an array that could expand during runtime, but we haven't gone over those. There's a list type, there's a vector type. Those are going to be the two main types that you would use to create a dynamically sizable array. Although that term is a bit incorrect because you can't really technically resize an array, but they sort of wrap around deleting and recreating arrays at runtime in a way that makes your code behave like it was interacting with a dynamically sized array. But we haven't covered either of those yet.
Here's a good one. When implementing an abstract method in a derived class, do I have to use the override keyword? If I do not use it, my code will compile but not run. With it, everything works fine. I seem to remember it differently.
Yeah, so you had something like an abstract class pet with a method called public abstract void do stuff. And then you might have a class dog that inherits from pet. And then he might have a public void do stuff member that says console write line. Actually, I don't think you can do this. No, it's not possible to do this. Are you sure you're not talking about virtual? Because you have to provide the override keyword when working with abstract members. Now, if this were virtual, then you don't have to, and I can explain why in a second, but I just want to verify that this is what you're talking about.
Sorry, what was the problem with your dog doing stuff?
You can't not implement an abstract member. So when I don't provide the override keyword, this won't compile, period.
The missing override keyword.
Right. However, the behavior that Nada was describing sounded more like he did this, where he had a virtual member and he didn't provide an override keyword. I just want to verify that that's what he meant. Okay, well, what's going on here is if we have let's say a list of pets, and we add a new dog to it. Well, let's add 2 dogs. And we say for each var pet in pets, and we say pet.dostuff. Now, when I hit F5, what you're going to see is the implementation here on line 11 gets executed, not the implementation on line 21. And here's why. The runtime object, the runtime type of this pet variable is pet. Or not the runtime, the compile time type for this variable is pet. However, in the case of this example, because all we have are dogs in this list, the runtime type of each one of these objects is going to be dog. Now, here's the thing. Because the compile time type is pet, when I say pet.dostuff, it's only going to know to look to this member, this function right here, or this method right here. it's only going to know to look at this method. And because we haven't provided the override keyword on line 19, we haven't made pet aware of the type of pet aware that dog can override that particular member. So as a result, you what?
No, carry on.
So as a result, we invoke the do stuff here on line 13. Because we haven't instructed the C# compiler to generate the code that would otherwise redirect the invocation of do stuff to the implementation of dog. By providing the override keyword, now what we've done is we've instructed the C# compiler to redirect all invocations of do stuff from the original pet implementation down to the dog implementation.
And I'd also, if you just take override out again, you should get your green squiggly back.
Yeah, the C# compiler is going to tell us that we're doing something stupid. Basically, it's saying that we are hiding a member, but we aren't overriding it. It'll give us two options: add the override keyword or add the new keyword. All the new keyword does is it makes that warning go away. It doesn't do anything else. So it did have a question. So can dog.dostuff ever run? Yes, it can. If the compile time type of a variable that is a dog is dog, then dostuff will be invoked. So if I say var dog equals new dog, notice that this variable is typed to dog. As a result, when I say dostuff, it doesn't need any sort of magical indirection logic here. It knows immediately that it's going to invoke the dostuff on this class because it knows the class at compile time. That, however,
similarly, if pets was a list of dog, the same would be true.
Yep, if pet was a list of dog, then this variable right here becomes a dog. And because it becomes a dog, then the dostuff is going to invoke this method directly. However, when we have this level of indirection here with inheritance, we need to instruct the C# compiler to create a sort of method map. It's called a virtual function pointer table that informs the runtime which method to invoke on a type that isn't known at compiler time. So did that answer your question, or?
Get used to noticing things like the green squigglies and the red squigglies and the blue squigglies and any other sort of squigglies and little dots that might turn up, and reading them and taking in what it's telling you. Similarly with debugging, if there's error messages, and I have seen this over the years, you know, in the forums, people will post saying, I've got an error message in my program, what's happening? And invariably then there'll be a list of people posting, well, what's the error message? And it seems that people just go, oh, it's an error message, and run away and hide. Read what the error message is telling you. Visual Studio is very good about putting it into as plain English as it possibly can. And if there's specific words that you can't understand from the context, Google them.
Yeah. Does VS have a string literal spell checker? Yes. Well, no. It has an add-in. I got annoyed from the add-in, so I actually uninstalled it because I ended up in programming.
That's you can't spell.
Well, no. In programming, we use so many nonsensical words, even in our string literals and comments, that I ended up adding so many exceptions to the dictionary that it became pointless to even have it installed.
Oh, actually, now this is probably worth mentioning in this video, because I did see a little back and forth on the forums about this. Someone gave an example of code using myfoo. Could you just explain about that meme?
Myfoo?
Yeah, then the question came back, that throws an error, myfoo not recognized.
Oh, right. Well, in a lot of programming examples, foo, I think biz, bar. Are there any other common ones? These are like the three common ones. We'll use these as placeholders.
X, as Sigful pointed out.
So when somebody says, "Oh, all you have to do is say foo dot," like somebody might ask, "Well, how do I invoke the do stuff method on my dog?" And then somebody might answer, "Well, just do foo dot do stuff." In this case, this is just going to be a placeholder for whatever object or whatever variable you're working with. So it doesn't literally mean this. So those are just common programming thingies. Okay. Let's see. Actually, some programming questions came in. Quite a few did. Would you use a switch or if else? I don't often use switches. I generally use if else's, but I don't know what that is in context.
I generally use switches.
I sent you a C# question. Oh yeah, I did mean to go over that at some point.
Do you want to dig that out during the break?
I have it up here.
Ah, cool.
Okay, so question was working on the abstract pet class and a dog class that inherits the pet class and not trying to get the dogs to mate. After the mating, I want the method to return a new dog, but it'll only let me return a pet since that's the return type in the abstract mate method. It said something about casting a pet to a dog, but we haven't really covered casting much. Let me go ahead and yank your program out and paste it into this.
Mating on matting can lead to all sorts of friction burns.
Okay, so we do have a compiling program. Right, when mating, because...
You shouldn't be showing his whole homework.
This is haven't we established a policy in the open office hours that we can, or...
Well, you can, it's not due till tomorrow. But hey.
Well,
Today. It's tomorrow for me. Because it's 1 a.m. the class for me. So that's tomorrow. Anyway.
Okay, well, basically, you can't have this return a dog, because if you have this return a dog, then you'll only be able to create dogs. Like, let's say you had a giraffe pet, and you mated a giraffe and a fish. By doing this, you would only be able to return a new dog. So if you mated a giraffe and a fish, it doesn't make sense to return a dog. It makes more sense to return maybe an altogether new pet subclass called mutant giraffe fish thing. And in that case, you'll want it to return the highest class in the hierarchy. So in this case, this is what you would want to do. This is kind of the epitome of polymorphism, where you don't know at compile time what exactly the type is you're working with. But at runtime, there are ways to allow you to do cool things, like using abstract methods and so on. There's no way to make this a dog, because these variables are really only pets. Think about it like this.
Too many jokes in my head at the moment.
So you have a method. This method is written in terms of the abstract class, so it can be used in a variety of different situations. But we're constrained. The more flexible we want to make this method, the higher up the hierarchy we have to represent our types as. So there's really no way to get this to be a dog. But remember, just because it's a types to a pet at compile time doesn't mean that D3 isn't a dog. D3 is a dog because it was two dogs mating. So it should be a var or cast it to a dog. It doesn't matter. It won't make a difference. See, even if I use implicit typing right here, it's still going to be cast to a pet. Always. Implicit typing will still cast it to a pet. Or still not cast it, will set the type of our variable to a pet. However, that doesn't mean this isn't a dog. Just because the variable type is a pet does not mean that this object is a dog. This object could be a dog, it could be a cat. For example, without changing the logic of the code at all, I can say class cat pet, and then implement the members. And for my mate method, I can simply say return new cat. So without changing the implementation of main at all, and the code will still compile, well, almost will compile. Okay, so the code will, almost again. So by hitting F5, the code will still compile. But I'm able to change the behavior of the code at runtime even. For example, I could say, how about if, I can do this. I can say if partner is a dog, then we can return a new dog. Actually, I want to see your original implementation right there. Okay, so you return a new dog called Bob. By allowing us to do this, by using polymorphism, we can do really cool things. We can say, if the partner is a dog, return a new dog. Otherwise, if the partner is a cat, then return a new cat.
As you said otherwise there, but you didn't type else.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't matter because it's return.
True.
And then I'm going to say throw new exception. So by using polymorphism, I can actually change the behavior of this function depending on things that can only be detected at runtime. So for example, if I were to say, okay, let's get our new dog that we mated, and now let's create a new cat. So let's say cat c1 equals new cat, whoa, there. And then we say pet child equals d1 dot mate with c1. And then pets dot add c1 and pets dot add child. So now you'll notice that I get two cats here because I mated a dog with a cat, so that therefore I got a cat because of the way this logic works. So I'm able to use, basically this is the whole fundamental point of polymorphism, is that we do not care what the runtime type of an object is. We only care that the runtime type of the object returned is compatible with some sort of abstract class or interface so that we can interact with them. So we don't want mate to return a dog. We don't want mate to return a cat. We don't want mate to return a giraffe. We want mate to return a pet. Because by returning a pet, we achieve maximum flexibility in how we can express our logic. Does that make sense? Can I use var as a type in the parameter list? No. You cannot use implicit typing as inside the parameter list.
Sorry, I was actually reading Ryan's question and got confused. Can you go over when you should use abstract over virtual?
Yeah. I just want to make sure I answered Barry's question, because he did send me a PM and I feel bad about not responding.
Barry, is it cool?
Okay. Okay. So actually, I'm going to start at the top of the question list.
Well, I brought that one up just because the example you've got up would be extensible.
Do we critique homework? No, not typically, I don't think. Maybe a little strange question, but since you talked about Unity, I've thought about something. I've been working with Unity Visual Studio for some time, but recently Unity Visual Studio has created a lot of new assembly C# project files. Before I only had one, but now I have many. Do you know why it duplicates these files? No. Unity has its own strange logic to determine how incredibly inefficient and annoying it'll organize your files. And
Not that you're bitter.
yeah. I'm just not. I do know, however, if you change the folder name of your project, then Unity will generate a new set of CSproj and slins. So that might have happened. Remember, you can delete your CSproj and slins inside of the Unity folder, and Unity will regenerate them for you. Just don't delete your assets folder or your library folder. But you can nuke your, like, for example, I don't know. For example, I can delete pretty much everything right here. I can delete all these CS projes and all the slins.
There's a slun in there.
Yeah, Unity will generate slins for us too.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So yeah. Okay, I understand that C++ arrays are static. With this in mind, if your program contains a conditional statement that declares an array with it, does the compiler allocate memory for the array even though the actual code, being conditional, may never get executed? The answer is yes. When using static arrays, when using arrays that are placed on the stack, if I say if false, actually, in the case of if false, this will probably be optimized out. So a better answer or a better example might be int choice cn choice, and then I could say if choice equals 0, then int my array 9001. This memory will be allocated on the main stack frame when main is invoked, regardless of if that code ever happens to execute. Because remember, variable definition declarations are not executable code. Now, initializations are. If I were to say int choice equals 10, this does generate an instruction for the CPU. However, in and of themselves, declarations are not executable code. Instead, they just inform C++ that we want that much more memory available to us when the function is invoked. What was that, Kevin?
No, it's all right.
Okay. Okay, so now can we go over abstract over virtual? Yes. So basically, when deciding to use abstract over virtual, just don't use interfaces instead. Okay, next question. So basically, the difference between abstract and virtual is a way to provide a default implementation for something. So if I were to say class, I don't know. Let's just do pet. I'm out of creativity for the day. So let's say I wanted to create a class pet, and I wanted to provide some default behavior for some methods. I wanted to say public virtual void, I don't know, say hi. Let's say by default, most of the pets in our model that we're creating can say hi. So we give the pet a default implementation of say hi. But we notice that there's not very much commonality between the way our pets can walk, so I'm going to make an abstract void walk method. Now notice the difference. The difference is the abstract method has no implementation, whereas the sayHi method does. So now, let's say we have a pony as a pet. And so, because we all know that ponies can speak, we don't have to worry about overriding the sayHi method, so we can choose not to. However, we still have to implement the walk method because it's abstract. So see, if I try to compile, I'll get an error saying, Pony does not implement inherited abstract member pet.walk. So what I'm going to have to do is provide an implementation. So public override void walk. And inside here I can say console writeline trotting or something. So now if we go ahead and let's go ahead and make a static void execute commands on pets that tells the pet to say hi, and then tells the pet what, Kevin? Hello?
Not just it doesn't matter.
So let's go ahead and instantiate a pony. If we were to invoke the execute commands on pets method and pass in our object, what we'll get is the implementation of sayHi that we defined in our abstract class here because it's virtual. And then we'll get the specific implementation of walk because it's abstract and we were forced to override this implementation. So let's say we have a dog now. And our dogs in our program can't say hi and they walk differently. So I'm going to say, I'm going to override both members. I'm going to choose to override sayHi, and I'm going to say console writeline, bark. And then, again, I'm forced to implement walk because walk is a abstract member. So now if I create a dog and say execute commands on pets and pass in dog, what I'll get is I've re-implemented the virtual member and I've been forced to re-implement the abstract member. So did that answer your question about the difference between abstract and virtual? Alrighty.
Cool. Could you use var as type in a parameter list?
No. Nope.
You can only use var when you can see from. I've said this so many times I've forgotten how to say it.
When
you can only use var when you could actually look at the line of code and work out what the var stands for.
Right.
That's when the compiler can do the same.
Yep.
It's literally the best way to approach using var, I would say, if you're not confident on it, is to not use it at first. Explicitly type your variables, and you'll notice. Is it ReSharper or IntelliSense that tells you to use var? Ah, right. Okay, that won't help. But if you got ReSharper, it would tell you when you can use it. But it's not. It has no effect on your actual code's
correctness.
What it does, if you use explicit typing, it's just a shorthand to save you typing.
Yep. Now, I do want to point out that some languages actually allow you to do this. F# is one of them, where it'll actually look forward into the method and decide what the parameters need to be, which I think is so cool. But you can't do that in C#. Okay. Is there any program that would allow a screen capture of the webinar? Do you have print screen button? Print screen in Paint?
Print screen in Paint is your friend.
Yes.
get into that
Could you talk about
practice.
some of the advantages of resharp, or maybe show it? If people are interested, at the end of the class, I can go over it for like 2 minutes and just show some basic stuff. But I want to keep things on focus on programming questions and while we have them.
Yeah. How would you access a derived class's type? How would you print out the console what type of pet a pet is? That's a good question.
That is a good question. But see, here's what I would do. I would create a public abstract string type property. And then I would override it in each one of the individual types. I would say public override type, and then its getter would simply return a constant pony. And then instead of dog, I would say dog. And now instead of my execute commands on pets, I can say console write line, we are working with a pet.type. So we are working with the pony, and we are working with the dog. I want to point out, though, that there are ways to get the type in string form without doing this additional code. But I want to stress that for an actual production system, when it's important to get the type and print it out to the user for whatever reason, I would prefer to do it this way. If you need to print the type out to the user. Now,
would you more likely call it something like pet type?
Probably. But since I don't have a sharper, I can't rename it quickly. Now, what you could do, you could say pet.getType, which is a method that's available on every single object in .NET. And I could say, invoke that method, then I can say .name. And we get the same result. However, I would not recommend doing this for presenting information to an end user, because it's not necessarily going to always be pets and dogs. We want to be free to name our classes whatever we want, and we don't want to rely on reflection to present information to the end user. Now, there's one more solution that we can do, and this solution has to do not with asking the pet for what type it is, but for conditionally executing logic depending on what type the pet is. So, if you wanted to conditionally execute logic, like let's say ponies have a fly method. Let's say only ponies have a fly method. What we can do is we can say if the pet is a pony, then var pony equals pony pet, pony.fly. So by doing this, we gain access to a specific method that's only available on one of the children classes. So if you wanted to conditionally execute code depending on if something is something else, use the is operator. Now alternatively, you could use the as operator as well. I could say pony, var pony equals pet as pony. And then I can say if pony does not equal null, then pony.fly.
Do you just want to explain that little bit of functionality in just a touch more detail?
Yeah.
The as and null.
The as operator will say, try to convert, if this pet object can, at runtime, be converted into a pony object, then return the result of that conversion into this variable. Otherwise, set this variable to null. So by saying var pony equals pet as pony, I'm saying try to turn this pet into a pony, but if you can't, simply return null, so then I can detect if you successfully converted it or not.
So if pony was actually a dog, then you would get pony would be null,
right?
And the pony.fly wouldn't get carried out.
So now we see.
Said, isn't that kind of like destroying the advantage polymorphism offers?
To an extent. There are cases when doing this is important, however. There are cases. And once we get into composition, there are fewer cases where this is important, but there still are some circumstances. Like, for example, if you were in Unity and you needed to detect what kind of object you ran into, you would do something like, if this object is a projectile, then do this. Or more specifically, if this object implements iProjectile, then convert it to a projectile. Okay.
Okay, how about this? If you pause the recording and we can give anyone else who has a question.
And we're back.
Yay!
Yay. So, I'm very confused on what exactly we were supposed to be implementing in the pet homework. The homework is really about just representing a type hierarchy in a way that makes sense to some sort of problem that you're trying to solve. And the problem you're trying to solve may simply just be creating a zoo of pets that print different things or perform different operations depending on what types those pets are. It's really up to you as long as you get some sort of inheritance hierarchy built into the program. But that object is only available within the method. Ken, I'm not sure what context you're referring to. I was able to get a for loop to bubble sort product prices for the C++ vending machine, but I can't get the product names to match up with the sorted prices. How can I go about doing that? Well, what you could do is, if you have an array of, let's say we have product prices for and string product names for, and if we looped around the product prices and did a proper bubble sort, which I'm not going to show the whole implementation, but I am giving a small hint for anybody who's paying attention. We could decide to swap, if so, swap both product prices and product names. Because the product prices and product names will line up, as in they'll correspond by index, you'll be able to swap both the items in the array, or you'll be able to swap both arrays just the same. So you'll use the product prices to do the comparison, but you'll swap both items in both arrays. Does that make sense, Ryan? Or Ken?
Essentially,
or Robert?
That was Wedge Bob, yeah. Essentially, any time you change one, change the other.
Right. Because they're going to line up. Alright, so are there any programming questions? Could I share my screen to review the code before you guys move to ReSharper, or are you short on time? We're not particularly short on time. I guess we could swap over to you, but I do want to answer any more specific questions before we do, if there are any. So I'm just going to sit around. I guess I'll go ahead and pause the video for like a minute. Alrighty, so we're back. So I'm going to jump over to Brandon's screen, and I guess we're going to look at his code.
Excellent desktop. If you're speaking, I, for one, can't hear you, Brandon.
might not have a mic. Oh, it sounds like someone's moving the mic around.
Yeah.
Is this okay, or is it loud?
There we go.
Hey.
Oh, that's great.
I'm sitting next to a rack server, so it's kind of noisy in here.
Nah.
I didn't know if that-
Productive day at work.
Yeah.
So yeah, so are there any questions? I mean, I like the prompt methods.
Yeah, it's just kind of something I was messing around with, kind of scrolling text.
Yeah.
I guess my main question with the code for this homework was, like, I got it finished up and everything, and I think it does everything it's supposed to, but it feels really messy when I look at it. So I was just wondering, like, are there ways, obvious ways that I missed that could have been improved?
Yeah. If you can give me a keyboard or at least mouse.
Okay.
I would probably name this. I notice you're naming your classes as plural.
Uh-huh.
I would probably name them using singular words because these particular classes don't represent more than one pet. For example, this only represents a single pet. So I'd probably name this pet and then this dog and then so on. But yeah, your class hierarchy looks good.
I mean, I recall hearing you saying something about switches being bad. I was just wondering, like, could you elaborate on that? Is that like a personal?
It's a personal preference. Honestly, right here, I would probably break each one of these methods that ask for the specific properties, or these case statements. I'd probably break these into methods. Now, they will be small methods, but it will make the code read a bit nicer.
Okay, so what should I have separated like any extra methods out into its own class, or should I kept that? Was it okay to keep that in main? Or the program class?
For this particular program, I would have just moved these into methods on the program class.
Okay.
And at least on this method right here, you're setting like a noise field depending on what type the object is. I would probably move the noise into a method on the base class or a property on the base class. So it would look like something like the base class would get a something that looks like this, or there we go. Something that looks like public abstract string noise. Or, sorry, just this. And then on each one of your derivative classes, then you would overwrite it there. Because whenever you find yourself doing logic like this, sometimes it's not appropriate to factor that out into the base class. But when it's something like a property of the object you're working on, then I would factor it out into a base class. Because each one of these classes have a noise that's specific to the base class. You want to make the main function be as generic as possible. You want to make the main function know as little as possible about the derivative classes and instead work as much as it can on the pet class itself. So does that make sense?
Yeah, actually, I mean, I originally thought of putting noise inside as a field for the abstract pet class, but then, like, one of the methods had to take in a variable of some kind, or sorry, argument. So that's really the only reason I moved that out there. I know that looks kind of dumb now.
But you can make your abstract methods take in. I mean, as you already have the make noise method. Like for example, I mean, you could keep it like this and then simply have another method or an abstract property called getNoise.
Okay. So would it have actually made more sense just to like maybe statically type that in the constructor for each of the pet types?
You mean a noise as a constructor argument?
Yeah.
Depends on. It really depends. If it's a value that you want to differ between multiple objects of the same class, then making it a constructor argument isn't a bad idea. If you want the noise to be the same on all objects of a particular class, so if you want all dogs to make the same noise and all cats to make the same noise, then it makes more sense to make it a abstract property or a method. But even if you make it an abstract property or a method, you can still override that. Like, for example, let's say we added just added that back in, the abstract string noise. You could still have, like, let's say you want dogs to be able to make different noises depending on how you instantiate them. You could still implement your public override string noise property and make it a get private set, and then you can take in that parameter as an argument. So you could say string noise and then noise equals noise. And by doing that, then you allow your oh, shut up. There we go. Then you allow your come on. I hate inheritance. See, with namespaces, or with interfaces, I'm going to undo all this code before I leave, so don't worry about me breaking everything.
Oh, don't worry. This is a copy of one I already submitted. So.
All right. So now you, by making this property an abstract property on the base type, you have the option to either have it be something that's set on a per object basis via constructor argument, or if you don't want that, you could always just not take it in as a constructor argument, and in your property implementation, just return a string literal.
Okay.
So you have different options there when using this kind of code. The one other thing is, if you do find yourself doing code like this right here, this will work, but a more robust way would be to use the is operator, which I know we haven't covered yet, but we will be talking about that in the class later today.
Okay.
You what?
Oh, sorry. So is basically like the double equal sign operator, but for comparing classes or types?
Yeah, it's for comparing an object to a type. So I can say if active pet is a dog.
Oh, okay, that would have made life easier.
Because if you do this, if you change the class name, then this will actually throw a compiler error, because if you change the dog's class name to something else, this will throw a compiler error, which will force you to go and update this code. Whereas this will not throw a compiler error if you change the type, which means that you won't be notified that you have to update this string literal.
Okay.
And where before you were using get type, why is that preferable? I know you said it wasn't preferable, but why is that preferable to type of?
Now you could do this. You could say type of dogs dot to string. But this is just, again, more code and not something, and more expensive as well, because you're converting both these types to strings and then doing string comparison. Whereas if you did this, or use the is operator, it would be cleaner and faster, basically. Actually, this will turn. This is actually what the is operator turns into, but it'll still be cleaner.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, other than that, just getting the noise inside the pet base class and probably breaking each one of these methods out into their, or each one of these case statements out into their own methods, and maybe even breaking this whole while true into its own method, maybe just to get the method line count down. But other than that, yeah, it looks good.
All right. Another question I had was with the kind of like this interface of this program for the homework. Were you guys expecting the user to be able to get back to the first stage? Like, if let's say I typed exit here, was I supposed to be able to let the user get back to this first part?
I don't think that was specified in the prompt.
Okay.
No, that's not. That's fine. Excellent. Oh, I particularly like Paperback Writer, by the way. Very nice.
Oh, thank you.
All right, but yeah, sweet. So, jump back to...
Barry asked, why does ReSharper suggest to remove redundant else? That'd be one of two things. Assuming your code is working properly, it will be because you've got a return statement just before it. Which makes the else redundant. If that's not the case, there could be a problem with your if statement always being either true or false. Well, true, yeah.
Yeah, I'll go over some of the things that ReSharper will tell you about now, actually. But Segfold asks, is it worth going over how to split everything up to separate files? I don't know if we are going to be talking about that today or not.
You can do it with ReSharper.
Yeah, ReSharper has...
Alt-Enter, Editor.
It's pretty much all you need to... Well, you need to know Alt-Enter, Control-Shift-R, and Alt-Insert.
Alt-Insert, yeah. Oh yeah, Barry said yes, I have returned before it. Yeah, what's happening is because you're returning there, in the if, either the if will happen, in which case you will return, or you won't return, and then you'll end up where the else is anyway.
Right, so...
It's a tautology saying returning an else. It won't break your code, but it is just unnecessary.
See, if this is true, then we'll just simply return out of the method. Otherwise, the else is redundant. So ReSharper is going to suggest to remove the else altogether, and we get this code. Okay, so basic rundown through ReSharper. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. Just for people who were wondering what it does, I guess we'll go over a few of the features, but I don't want this to be an intro into the ReSharper functionality because we are saving that for a specific class where everybody will be present. But just as something to play around with while we're waiting on maybe some more questions or to entertain people who are bored. ReSharper. So ReSharper is a plugin that we can get over on the JetBrains website. Excuse me.
Gesundheit.
And yeah, so it's a really cool little program. It's not very expensive. It is, I forgot, it's going to be $200 for a personal license, which is ridiculously cheap for this sort of functionality. And if you just want C# because Visual Basic.NET sucks, then you're only going to be paying $150. So ReSharper basically is a plugin into Visual Studio that gives us a lot of neat functionality. Straight off the bat, we see two things that are different about our program that wouldn't be like this if we didn't have ReSharper installed. Now note, I am on my production version of Visual Studio where I have all my extensions installed. So this is not the VM that I have Express installed on. This is Visual Studio Ultimate. So the two things that we'll notice straight off is the gutter right here, which the gutter will tell us if there are any warnings or errors or suggestions that ReSharper is going to make about our code in this file. So you see this is yellow. That means this file has warnings in it. Now if you jump over here, you'll notice that some of these lines are grayed out. And they're grayed out because none of these things are used. Now I want to point out that using system.link is not being used either. However, I have a rule set up in ReSharper that says never remove the using system.link declaration. So basically, that's ReSharper is informing us of some code that shouldn't exist. And if we put our mouse cursor here on any of this gray code, you'll notice this little guy jumps up. The action list is a contextual list of actions that ReSharper can perform for us, and it's accessible via the Alt-Enter shortcut key. So just to show you how I would really quickly remove all of the extraneous code in my file, I would hit Alt-Enter to remove that. Then I would hit Alt-Page down to jump my keyboard cursor to this args parameter, which is also grayed out, and then I would hit Alt-Enter again, which would remove that code. So basically, So basically, this is really awesome. Some of the features that we have are like code generation. For example, if I had a person class, and let's say I gave him a constructor. Now notice how that constructor just appeared magically. What I did was I hit Alt-Insert-Enter, and it created the constructor. And let's say we want to give our constructor, our person, a first name. So now what I did was I hit escape. So I typed in string first name. Then I hit escape to get rid of that suggestions window. Then I hit Alt-Enter. And when I hit Alt-Enter, it's going to give us a lot of cool little functionality we can use. So for example, I can just hit the down arrow and say create and initialize auto property first name. And I can say string last name. Int age. So as you see, I'm generating code really quickly.
Do you want to really blow their minds?
I don't know yet. Or what?
Generate equality members.
We haven't quite covered equality members yet.
No, but it really shows off what ReSharper is good at.
Yeah, but if we wanted to generate equality members, meaning we wanted to generate equality... Wow, I was about to repeat the same thing twice.
Yeah.
If we wanted to generate members that test for equality, we can simply hit Alt-Insert-E, and then we can hit spacebar to select that we want to consider two people equal if all of these properties are the same, and then hit enter. And we get a lot of code that just magically appeared for us. If we wanted to generate a toString method, we can just do that. So a lot of code just magically appeared for us, courtesy of ReSharper. So I'm just going to go ahead.
And the equality members is my particular favorite because it does generate about 70 or 80 lines of code.
Right, and this is
that is a real pain to actually work through the logic of making sure you've got it right if you have to do it by hand.
Yeah. And
it's one of those things that if you get it wrong, you're in real trouble as well.
Yeah. So I'm just going to remove that just to get rid of some of the noise. Some other features, we can go ahead and have ReSharper move our classes, our class into another file. So notice how a person file just appeared. We can use ReSharper to insert folders.
You should explain that that was Alt-Enter-Enter on the name of the class.
Yeah. I went up to Alt-Enter, and then there was an option saying, wait a sec, person isn't in a file named person, so let's go ahead and move it to that file. So another cool feature that I use quite often is Alt-Insert in the Solution Explorer. So maybe I want to create a new folder called Stuff, and then maybe I want to insert a class called Whoa, and then maybe I want a structure called Hey, maybe I want a enumeration called Bleh, and so on. Some more cool features, if I wanted to jump to my
You what? was gonna say all of those, because the frame rate isn't even picking up the menu coming up. All of those are off the same Alt Insert keyboard shortcut.
Yep.
And then you just pick the option you want.
And I'm using Control-Shift-L to move focus over to my Solution Explorer. So it's a really fast way. If I want a new class, I just have to say this, and I have a new class.
It can also then do all sorts of wonderful things like automatically generating interfaces and or abstract classes for you from concrete classes.
Yep. But really quickly, now that I have multiple files, it has a variety of ways to navigate between files. So, for example, I can hit Control, comma to get a list of all the files that I've recently opened. I can hit Control Shift, comma to get the recent edits that I've made. So I can jump back and forth between lines of code that I've edited. I can hit Control T to jump to a specific type. So if I hit Control T and hit typed in person, I get to person. I can type Control Shift T to get to a particular file or folder. So I can type in program. If I wanted to jump back over to the person type and maybe give him a few more members, I could hit Alt backslash and get to a list of all the members inside this type that I'm on. And I can also filter it down by name as well.
Also, if you go back over to your stacked class,
right. It'll also inform me that this doesn't follow the naming conventions. So I can hit Alt, Enter, and then I can say rename to a class type that follows my conventions. We can have ReSharper generate entire classes for us. So I can say var ble equals new hey, and then I can say ble.stuff, and then I can say create class hey, create method stuff. So I've just created a class from nothing, essentially. And then I can move it over to its own file if I wanted to. Let's see, another feature is I can rename things. ReSharper can rename everything pretty much, so let's rename this class to hey there. Now it's renamed. All instances are guaranteed to work. I can do what's called a safe delete. The safe delete, and by the way, I got this menu by hitting Control-Shift-R. A safe delete will inform me of every usage of this class. So when I hit enter, or it didn't that time, but whatever.
also on the renaming, it will also, with option dialogues that pop up, search for those names in string literals and in comments as well.
Yep. So if I had, let's say, program.main.
And it also renames the CS file, as Sigfoot pointed out.
So if I said program.main is my entry point in a comment, and I rename this to ble.wo, what it's going to do is it's going to say, wait a sec, there's a comment that has program in it. Do you want to rename that as well? And I say yes. And then you notice it renames it to ble.wo.main as my entry point.
Just about anything where at some point more than one programmer has sat there and gone, oh, I wish it could do this. They've managed to cram into ReSharper. It really is amazing. It really is very, very good.
Yep, and you can do stuff like add in parameters to methods. Let's say I invoke this method with a parameter of 10. All I have to do is hit Alt-Enter, and I can say add int parameter to 10, or add int parameter to stuff. And I can go ahead and rename it by hitting Alt page down, and then call this stuff if I wanted to. Let's say I had 10 and 10.5, so 2 parameters. Now let's say I wanted to rearrange these. I could hit Control-Shift-Alt-Left arrow, and then Alt-Enter, and then apply change signature refactoring, which will actually swap all of the arguments passed into this method, as you see right there on line 9.
Put stuff above main.
I could also do Control-Shift-Alt-Up arrow to move it above main.
You will find handy, because the one thing it does that is really annoying is put properties in the wrong place.
Yeah, I use the up and down a lot, and well, even then, there's like even inside like an if statement, if we have an if true, and I had a var I equals 10, I can use Control Shift Alt to move this into the if statement as I wanted to, if I wanted to, or below the if statement.
Right, now you've got that if there. You can reverse that if you want.
Yep, if I wanted to reverse the if, I can go ahead and do that with the invert if.
And also, put a for loop around that if.
Oh, you mean the link stuff?
Yeah, you'll need a collection. Sorry.
Oh, I do want to point this out. Let's say I wanted to instantiate a new list, but the list type isn't available to me right now because I don't have the using system collections generic. I can hit Control. What is it? There we go. I can see a lot of these shortcuts I can do so quickly, but then when I try to think about what they are, I kind of forget. It's Control Alt Space, and then I can type in the word list, or no, it's Shift Alt Space. That's what it is. And I can type in the word list, and it'll find the list type in one of the namespaces that I don't have imported yet. And then when I start using it, all of a sudden, the using systems collection generic pops up on line 1. And now I can.
So what was that keyboard shortcut again? Because that's really handy.
Shift Alt Space.
Cool.
And then you can start typing in any type that you want that's available to you. So if we did like, let's say we wanted to filter this list, we want to say for each var item in list, if item is greater than 5.
This to me is just while you're typing. This was a key thing for me. This is another usage for ReSharper, which is basically it will teach you better coding practice, and this is basically how I got my head around using link, is by doing what Nelson's about to go through now. Eating ice into a microphone, I mean.
So as you see, ReSharper took the code that I have right here and turned it into the equivalent link code.
How did you do that?
That was Alt Insert or Alt Enter, and then convert into link expression. And as you see right here, we also have a convert to a for loop, which might be interesting for people who want to get the index like we talked about previously in this class. So yeah, basically a lot of really cool stuff.
Well, I think that's a good brief overview. Otherwise, you're going to have nothing left to teach.
Yeah, I do want to point out one thing just to the people in this who are here for programming in C#. Let's say we have an abstract pet class, and we have a public abstract void walk. And then let's say we had a class dog that implemented or that inherited from pet. I can just hit Alt Enter Enter, and I automatically get an implementation of all the abstract methods. But more importantly, let's say I decided to add a new abstract method to pet. I could go ahead and say public abstract void talk. And what happens here is when I put my keyboard cursor inside of this identifier, this guy pops up, which again is accessible from Alt Enter, and I can say implement member and derived classes. And I can say all above types, and I automatically get an implementation for all of my types now implements that abstract method.
And I know this isn't something you do because of you work the opposite way around, but do you want to just show them extracting the interface from the concrete?
So if I have this type, but I wanted to turn it into a base type or a super type, I can hit Control Shift R, and I can say extract interface or extract superclass. I'm going to talk about extract. I'm going to do extract superclass because that's the ones we've been talking about. And I can hit Enter, and then I can hit Alt, and then let's say we want all properties or all public. So I hit Alt, then P basically that clicked this button right here. And I can type in a name for pet, and I can hit enter, and now I have a base type. And I can do the same for an interface. I can say extract interface, Alt-P enter, and now I have an interface. Maybe the last one I swear. Let's say I have a bunch of properties like string name, string color, and I wanted to provide these all via constructor argument. So what that was Alt insert inner space inner, and I get this.
And once again in slow motion.
Alt.
Oh, also, if you could, did you talk about the other way where it auto generates properties for?
Yeah, that's one of the first ones I did.
Construction. But not via that, because there's the space bar at the bottom, the drop down of auto property rather than throwing new thing.
Oh, right. So I can do that in a second. But to get the constructor is Alt insert enter, then space, and space will basically make it so all these properties are selected, and then enter, and I get a constructor. And then what Gav was talking about is, let's say I have an interface. Which we're going to be talking about later here. I can have dog implement iPet, and then I can hit Alt enter enter. Then I want, actually, what was I doing? These should be properties.
Yeah, no, I wasn't asking about interfaces at all. You could have done that in the in any class.
So now I want to implement all these members, but I want to implement them as automatic properties. That's going to be Alt enter enter Alt P A enter enter.
Once more for luck. Tell them, point at where they are on the screen rather than just...
Alt enter, enter. Alt P to pop up this little dialog up here. Then A to select automatic property. Enter to select that option. And then enter to finish. Do I ever use my keyboard? Well, I use my keyboard to invoke resharper commands.
He's actually only got 4 buttons on his keyboard.
Oh, do I ever use my mouse? I typically stay far away from my mouse as possible. I can navigate everything with just my keyboard. All you need to know...
It is a huge time saver because in order to use your mouse, you need to move your hand away from the keyboard.
Right.
And back again. And the number of times you're going to be doing that. That's why particularly that Alt-Shift-L is particularly...
Yep.
Alt-Shift? Yeah.
Alt-Shift-L.
I have the same problem as you. I can't remember what they are. I just do them. Because otherwise you've got to click into the Solution Explorer.
Yep. And to get back into the editor window, you just hit Escape.
And yeah, as Segfall points out, things like that equality member generation is stuff that is absolutely standard. You do it one way and that's the way you do it. And it's a pain to do by hand. And because it's a standard thing, it can do it for you.
Yep. So ReSharper basically does everything you can possibly want. The navigation is really cool. Like I can navigate between base types and drive types.
I'll tell you what. If you all your classes, if you make another folder and chuck some of your classes in there.
Yeah, and I want to go ahead and let's go ahead and
show the refactoring.
And not just namespaces. Let's move types into matching files. Oh, come on. Oh, that's the wrong one. I want program. Where's my program? Oh, it's still called blah blah apparently. Then let's move our pet and person into our whoa namespace. Let's move our dog into our stuff namespace. And if I wanted to fix the namespaces here, all I had to do is go to my Solution Explorer, select the project, hit Control-Shift-R, hit the up arrow twice, or actually just adjust namespaces in this case, hit Enter, and then hit Enter. And it's adjusted all my namespaces for me. How am I jumping to each keyword? Keyword. I don't know.
I think you might be referring to Alt page up and page down for stepping through what it recognizes as being...
Ah, right. So if I had like an error right here, And if I had two errors in my project, I can hit Alt page up and page down to swap between these two errors, which makes implementing a bunch of methods really easy. So I can say var cat equals new cat, and then cat.talk, cat.walk, cat.fly. Now I can hit Alt enter, 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 and then I can go ahead and hit Alt page up, page up, page up, and continuously implement all of the members.
So cool. That's a brief overview of ReSharper and why every sane programmer loves it.
Yep. So did that answer the person's question about why you would buy ReSharper? And we will be going more in depth into it again at an actual class.
This is the thing, the sheer amount of stuff it does for you, it makes it very difficult to briefly summarize why you would use it. You would use it because of just the sheer amount of stuff it does. And does elegantly, quickly, easily. Oh, it's lovely.
Oh, Barry, were you talking about how when I went into my my iPet, I was able to jump from my string name down to the implementation of my name? I could hit Alt Home to get to the where that is defined in the base type, and I can hit Alt End to get where it's defined in a child type.
Brandon, no, I can't see it anymore. Do you have a question from Brandon Nelson?
I don't know. Oh, going from left and right like this? Control. That's not a ReSharper thing, that's a Visual Studio thing.
Yeah.
And then I can hit Control Shift to select whole words.
At some point it suggested this change for me on an if statement on a bool variable. Convert to method call with, it's talking about a ternary.
Yeah, something like...
will you be covering that? Oh, no, probably not.
we will be. But he's talking about, for everybody who's confused, he's talking about this syntax right here. This is called the ternary, and it is in the course syllabus. So we will be talking about that.
Well, unless there's any other questions, I guess that's about time to wrap things up. Start getting ready for the next course.
Yeah. Any more questions? I know we went kind of beyond stuff here, but we will be going over everything that we covered in addition here, either in the ReSharper course later or in tonight's class.
Well, we like to give good video. Did you see what Nathan just posted?
Yeah, I'll deal with it.
I thought that would be about the response. I've got a whole raft of layout issues to point out to you now.
Oh, yay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess that is it. So, yeah, goodbye, everyone. And this ends the open office hours.